Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very last session of CME Palooza Fall. Thanks for all of you who have joined us so far for all the sessions. Thanks to you who are watching this on the archive. We really appreciate it. I am going to give our quick intro slides, and then I will turn things over to Karen Roy, our moderator for this session. So this is the Publishing Outcomes Data Tips and Tricks session. It's sponsored by Genentech, who we give a big thank you to. Moderator for this session is Karen Roy, as I already mentioned. Again, just to reiterate, here's all of our sponsors. Genentech is our gold sponsor. Our silver sponsors, iMedix, MedPage Today. Our bronze sponsors, CMEology, Educational Measures, Highmark CE, Impact Education, MedEdicus, RedMedEd, and Vivacity Consulting. 3 ways to ask questions, and we really encourage you to ask as many questions as you can. We've had good interaction thus far, so we're hoping to get some questions this session as well. So 1, you can use the MedPage Today text line to send in a question, 267-6660-CME. You can click on the Google Plus Q&A link located at the bottom of each video. You do need to have a Google Plus account in order to do that. And you can always tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag. As always, the opinions and discussions and conclusions expressed are those of the panelists. They don't represent an endorsement by or position of their employers or parent company or affiliates. And here is our panel, and I'll start out by introducing Karen Roy. Karen is principal at, okay, Karen, Argillon Group. Did I do that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Providing best practice consulting to a range of clients and collaborators in healthcare education. Prior to establishing her consulting practice, Karen had over 2 decades of global experience in industry in Europe and the US. She's passionate about the drive to publish data related to continuing education programs and has herself successfully presented educational outcomes insights at major medical meetings. Karen, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks to you and Scott for putting together a great program. I've been glued to my iPad all day.
Thank you.
And I'm very pleased to be leading this last session because I really feel we've been building to this discussion in some way over the course of the day. During Allison's session earlier on this morning about content, we were starting to stray into discussions about sharing our data. And once again, in the MEC section, we were talking about collaboration and skill setting. And I think in the quality improvement section as well, there was a lot of discussion about accountability for what we do in the CME enterprise and a call to share best practices. So I think everybody's been waiting for this session all day, and I'm very pleased to introduce my panelists, Dr. Drake, Christopher Drake. Chris is Director of Sleep Research at the Henry Ford Hospital Sleep Center in Detroit and Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at the School of Medicine at Wayne State University. He's a licensed clinical psychologist, board certified in sleep medicine, and a fellow of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Chris's research interests are primarily focused on human sleep research with an emphasis on the factors that predispose individuals to sleep disorders on a broad level, and insomnia and circadian rhythm disorders specifically. He serves on the editorial board of 2 journals, Sleep and Behavioral Sleep Medicine, so brings the publications perspective from that side, as well as being an accomplished author with over 100 publications to his name. He's also past chairman of the National Sleep Foundation. But more importantly, why did I ask Chris to be part of this panel? Chris and I have known each other for a long time, and I've come to know Chris as not only an engaging faculty member and speaker and advisor when he's involved in CME activities, but also very engaged. He's always interested to know the purpose of what we're doing, how we're executing, the way we're executing, actively seeks feedback on his own performance and input, and is interested to know how things turned out at the end of the day when the programs are over. So has an interest in what we've been doing in the publication space. Dr. Allison Gardner the hardworking woman behind CME Palooza, you see Allison earlier on today, has a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from a kind of relatively well-known institution, Johns Hopkins University. So pretty bright spark. Thank you, Allison, for joining us. In her position as Vice President for Educational Strategy and Content at MedIQ, she brings her 15 years experience in CME to provide overall direction and insight into the clinical focus and platform design of MedIQ's educational activities and initiatives. But again, why did I ask Allison to join me in this panel at the end of this very interesting day? Well, Allison is passionate about collaboration with faculty and bringing the best to the CME programs that she's involved with. But overall, MedIQ as an organization, as an accredited provider, and have impressed me as a group that have a particularly strong publications record and a commitment to publishing their data. So I really wanted to tap into Allison's expertise and experience here and share a little bit behind what's in their approach to this. So thank you, Allison. So with that said, I would like to open this session by sharing my perspective on why I believe this session is important to the community. And really it comes down to three things for me. One, I think our publications give us an opportunity to demonstrate the value of what we do in CME and show the data that we can collect and report on and impact on clinician practice and ultimately patient care. I think it encourages a research discipline within our educational interventional approach. And also, I think it offers an opportunity to increase the transparency behind what's going on in this CME enterprise as a whole. Pretty much every other endeavor that touches on professionals' education and training and impact on patient care has some sort of requirement or element of public reporting. And I think it's a matter of time, maybe before that comes to the CME space. But I think it's important to demonstrate what we're doing. There's a lot of money that's spent on CME. There's a lot of hours that clinicians put into this. We're increasingly asked them to do more and access their patients. So I think it's only right and proper that we're sharing those outcomes in the public arena. But I'd like to ask Allison first, and then come to Chris, if you had any other additional thoughts or your motivation behind this panel.
I think the publication and publishing our work and sharing it helps demonstrate our value, that we can design very rigorous research-like initiatives and get real outcomes that hopefully that we can show make a positive difference on patient care.
That's great. And Chris, if I could come to you with the same question.
Sure. Well, I think it's very important to understand how CME is changing and moving from a much more of a passive educational approach to much more, interactive and engaging. And I think in conjunction with that, it's an important thing for us to demonstrate as CME providers that not only the value, or at least with publication and the value that you mentioned that you're going to add with publication, it's going to help, I think, to engage individuals and sort of draw them into understanding what the value is really going to be when they're actually going to go in and do something active with the CME program, and they can see that from a publication where you can have a lot more in-depth data provided, and if people look at that, I think that's going to draw them in, engage them more with the things that are provided in terms of education.
I think that's a really good point, because one of the things we talk about in the CME community is that often we work in silos and we speak to each other about the value of what we do. And as you said, I think publishing data opens that why behind it to a broader audience with a different perspective. So one of the things I just wanted to clarify when we're talking about publications for the purpose of this discussion is that I would like us to think about everything on a continuum, from perhaps magazine articles that are not peer-reviewed through to abstracts and posters presented at medical meetings, all the way up to peer-reviewed manuscripts. So therefore, really recognizing that not all CME activities may yield data suitable for full manuscript submission, but I think we should be putting the lens or a filter through what we can do in terms of publication planning. And also the other thing I wanted us to think about as well is what are the sources of our data? And for me, it comes down to three things. One, our needs assessment data and reflecting back the healthcare gap and performance gaps to a wider community. Secondly, our outcomes data and showing the impact that we've had. But thirdly, also reporting our educational methodology, new formats, and demonstrating how they impact the learners, particularly as generations kind of take over in medical practice and learning preferences and needs change. I think it's important that we keep track of that. So having said all of that and framed the discussion, Alison, how do you think we're performing in terms of what we are managing to publish to date?
I think it's early days in terms of the percentage of activities that are moving on to any of those types of publications that you talked about. So Scott Weber, the CEO, gave a talk at the CBI West meeting in April, and one of the things that he talked about was there were 125 publications indexed on PubMed from activities, CME activities, so outcomes data. ACCME said that there was over 133,000 activities in 2013. So that means that we're publishing less than 1% of activities. And I'm not saying that we should be publishing 100%, but I think there is vast room for improvement in terms of what we're getting out there in some kind of published form.
Right. And Chris, as someone who's been involved in CME for, I guess, more than 10 years at this point, is this something you've had much experience in, or is it a new kind of focus for you?
It's certainly new for me to some extent. I mean, I guess I divide it up into the CME publications that are more sort of out there for clinicians to acquire CME, from the other type of publications and what we're focusing on here, which are more sort of an in-depth look at a program and what it provides. And in terms of the former, I've done several publications, which are available for CME to get CME from clinicians, but have probably only been involved with one. That's with you, with regard to looking at outcomes and how the changes in outcomes occurred. Where I think there's a lot of room for lots and lots of CME. Again, now back to the idea that there are much more interactive programs available, so you can get much more in-depth information from a CME program publication, as opposed to just simply content. You can tell providers, you can tell clinicians where they might want to focus, where the biggest pitfalls are in practice, and I think that's information that's going to be much more valuable than, again, just the standard sort of CME programs that are available.
Great, thank you. And actually, towards the end of our session, I'll share with the audience the abstract and poster submission that we worked on together, and a little bit of the insight on how that came to be. So thanks for teeing that up nicely. So the session, one of the aims of this session was to give some practical tips and guidance. So if we start thinking about things right from the beginning, from planning perspective, my question for Alison would be, should CME providers have a publication plan for every activity or series of activities that you design?
I don't think so. I think that we should be selective in picking certain activities. But with that said, I do think that we should plan for it on the front end and make that end goal of a manuscript part of the conversation from the start, just because I think it affects how we talk to faculty about it. It may affect the faculty's buy-in into it. And also considerations like getting an IRB approval that may come into play with different types of platforms, and that's not something that you can go back and get at the end. So I think if you have a plan to publish, it really needs to be part of the plan all along. And you can publish all sorts of different types of platforms. It doesn't always have to be the super rigorous involved research platforms. It could be just a new innovation on something that's been around for a long time, or needs assessment data. So like you were saying at the start, it can be all sorts of different flavors of things that we do.
So, Chris, as an academic research, I guess one of the currencies of the output from you and your team at the lab is your publication stream. So, what advice would you give to us in the CME community? How do we know if we have publishable data, and think on how to plan to share that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that you probably never really know up front whether or not you're going to have publishable data. I guess I agree with Allison that not everything should be published, and certainly I think you laid out something very important to consider. If you want something published, you can certainly aim for a very strong publication in a top journal. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be value if it doesn't make it there in something that's in abstract form that you can potentially post on your website as a CME provider. And I think that should show individuals, both faculty and clinicians who are taking the programs, that you're serious about what you do. And again, I know I've talked about it a lot, but being more engaged in terms of interactive programs, I think, can be really helpful in publishing. Now, that being said, while we don't know what's going to be publishable, we certainly can address certain things that can help improve that possibility. So, for example, obvious things like increasing the sample size is going to improve your generalizability. So having hundreds and hundreds of specialists in a particular area is extremely important. I think in most cases it's a necessary but non-sufficient factor for publishing in a very high level, high impact area, and that's going to allow you to generalize that data on individuals who have taken the CME, generalize it to a specific therapeutic area across the country, and also really diligence in processing and ensuring quality data. So what Allison mentioned, that you want to involve all players up front, I think is critically important. You want to give yourself the best chance for success. So planning very, very early on in the process to iron out all the kinks that you can. I mean, I know I've been involved in lots of CMEs where after the fact, maybe the program was great, but because it was great, someone wanted to publish it or someone wanted to pursue something about it to make it more long term. And in many cases, there's just maybe one or two things that could have been changed up front that weren't. So you can't really go backwards in most cases. So it's very important to do that up front planning.
Great.
And one thing that I'll just add here is when we're thinking about incorporating this into CME with different publication-based deliverables that are in CME, another thing to consider is you have to publish something that's unique. So when you're publishing along the way in terms of putting out CME activities that are available in print form, what you published has to be different than what you've already created and put out there. So that's another reason why you need to plan. You have to know what is going to be the addition to that publication that will make it a unique piece of work.
Great, great. So, Alison, I have to apologize. You went in and out a little bit for me here. I seem to be having some connection problems. But one of the questions I wanted to pose to you is, if you are seeking commercial support or industry support for publication, would you advise people to put that in their grant request up front as well and outline exactly what they're intending to do?
That's been our practice. It has worked for us. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But because we make that plan along the way, we do put it in our grant request, and we let the supporters know that it's our intention to take this, and we specify if we think that we would put it into an abstract form, or if we would go all the way to try to submit it for consideration in a peer-reviewed journal. Just because from our planning perspective, we want to make sure that that is in the plan, from the outset.
Great, great. Because it's very difficult for supporters to retrospectively then approve something for funding. So I always, wearing my ex-supporter hat, I always say put everything up front, say what you intend to do. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but it's much easier to do that than seek follow-on funding after the fact. So another important aspect of planning is really involving faculty at the outset. So Alison, I wanted you to share your experiences on that as well. Have you found faculty to be excited about the prospect of being involved in something that's going to lead to a publication?
I don't know if it's always excited, to be perfectly honest. I mean, willing is a good word. I'll say they're always willing to participate. But really, I think because we work with so many academic faculty that this is really common in their day-to-day, so they know the drill, and they've always been really accepting of it. So we do let them know when we invite them to be on the activity straight away. We let them know that this would then lead to a publication, and you'll be hearing from us way after you think you're done with us to talk about this publication.
Great, great. And Chris, coming to you as a faculty member, how do you feel you can help at the outset in planning for not only the delivery of an exciting CME program, but publishing strategy after that?
Well, I think Alison mentioned something that I think is very important in that regard, which is the uniqueness of the data. I mean, while clearly, you know, CME providers are going to have access to needs assessments and things that they think are critically important within the context of a particular field, certainly the content experts, the faculty, can sometimes provide a nuanced sort of approach to that particular general objective that's in the CME, that's going to provide that uniqueness that I think makes other people who might be looking at publications interested enough to take a look at something that's you know, a CME publication, and I think that's critically important to be able to have a faculty member up front to help try to plan prospectively those little nuances that I think can be really key components in making a program novel in terms of the content.
So that's something I think I would pull out for our audience as a practical tip, is really engage your faculty early, use them for the information that they can bring to you. As I said, you know, Chris, with your experience on an editorial board, you can certainly give advice on how to structure a good submission. You know what the reviewers are looking for. As I mentioned before, a lot of our faculty members will be researchers just like you who are publishing every year, and so have that down pat and how to do that well. But also, if it's targeting magazines that your peers read or meetings that they attend, I think we can really lock into faculty advice there on where to bring our data. But one thing I wanted to draw on just briefly here, Derek, if you could bring up the slides I gave you from ICJME, something I wanted to share with the audience as a useful resource.
I will, and Karen, real quick, I do have a question from the audience when you are ready to accept questions.
Sure. But we'll go through this first, and then we can see what the question is.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. Slides are up, by the way.
The slides are up. Great.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't move on. Now they're up.
So I can't see the slides you're looking at, Derek. Is it the ICJ?
If you click on the box that shows the slides.
Okay.
If you click on it, it'll show up full screen in yours.
Okay. I can see it perfectly. Thank you. So I want to share this as a resource. Actually, I have it here. It's 15 pages. Recommendations for the conduct, reporting, editing, and publication of scholarly work in medical journals, available at icmje.org. It's from the International Committee on Medical Journal Editors. It's a very useful PDF. And in the next slide, you can see the breakdown of the content included within that, all the major sections that it covers, everything really regarding ethics, roles and responsibilities of everybody involved in publications, etc. manuscript for submission. So I would really advise people to take a look at this as a very practical resource. One of the most important things, I think, that their criteria are very important, and this is what medical journal editors will look at. It's also something that your industry colleagues in publications will be very familiar with. But I think the reason why I wanted to share it today is that I think it's very important to consider what you're doing if you're asking a faculty member or you're deciding within your own team who is going to be an author on one of your publications. The criteria are very specific, and state that authorship requires substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work. So that to me says involve people very early, and you can't really just rock up to someone 6 months later and say, hey, you're an important person in this field, can we put your name on this paper? They should also be involved in drafting the work, or I think revising it critically for important intellectual content, and have final approval of the version that's going to be published. And a new criteria that they added, I believe, last year was agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work, ensuring that any questions related to the accuracy or the integrity of any part of it are appropriately investigated and resolved. So authorship in the medical journal is taken very seriously, and I would suggest from a compliance perspective, but also to increase your chances of publication in the review, that you ensure that you adhere to these authorship criteria when planning your programs. So Derek, if you'd like to share that question with us now, it might be a good time to take it.
Sure. So the question is, what about submitting meeting abstracts or posters at annual conferences? Is that any better or worse approach to sharing good data?
I will give you my answer, but I would like to go to Chris and Allison first. Allison, posters at medical meetings.
I think that that's a great place to take data. Timing is really important with that, you know, where...
Allison there?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. I think timing is, it has to work in your benefit with meetings, in that you have your results in time to submit with all of their requirements, and and time frames in terms of when the meeting's happening, when the abstracts are being accepted. So aside from that, I think that that's a really great opportunity. And meetings at or posters at meetings, when you have poster sessions, that just gives a nice opportunity to talk about your data with people who are interested. It's, I think, a nice format.
Yeah, I was gonna.
I agree. Chris, would you like to add anything about posters?
Yeah, I mean, I think Allison hit on the real important point for me, which is, there's certainly disadvantages of posters relative to maybe a prestigious publication in a prestigious medical journal. But as Allison said, the interactive element is huge there, and having a poster in a session where you can actually talk with leaders of the field and really be involved. And I know you and I, we're going to talk a little bit more about the experience we had this year at the SLEEP meeting. But when you're doing innovative programs, having access to individuals in meetings like that face to face, there's really no substitute for that. Now, in terms of the journal publications, clearly, I think the prestige factor and the depth factor come into play. So you certainly want to be able to publish in a top journal if possible, and you can do that along with the abstract publications at medical meetings. But the prestigious medical journal publication is certainly going to get you a lot further in terms of being able to promote your CME company and actually attract top faculty for the programs that you're doing. You can advertise that as a component, and so those are important venues of publication. And then the last thing is the depth. You can spend a lot more time in a publication, a medical publication, than you can in an abstract, discussing some of the unique features and the nuances that go along with more of the non-conventional programs that are starting to be more of the norm in terms of interactive CME.
I agree with everything that you both said, and what I would add as a point of encouragement to providers is that maybe posters is a place to start. They're smaller in scope. You've got a few data points that you want to bring across. You can test the waters and see if your information is getting past that peer review process. I think the interactivity point is a great one, and it's another way of sharing data. And also, there's perhaps an opportunity to share interim data while an activity is still posted. Our CME programs, remember, something that's online, for example, is accredited and available for a year. Well, we may not have to wait the full year to get a decent sample size. Certainly, my experience and what I hear from providers 4 or 5 months. So you may be able to get a sample that's adequate and generalizable, as you put it earlier, Chris, to submit to a meeting, and then by the time the meeting comes around, perhaps you have your full data cohort in place. So I think posters are absolutely a great place. And actually, while we're talking about posters, Derek, if you could bring up the slide with the example of the poster that Chris and I worked on together, I can tell you a little bit about that. We promised we would share some examples. This poster
can you see
was
it?
presented at Sleep 24. Is it up? I can't actually see it, but
yes,
I trust you.
It's up.
This is an activity that was actually posted online. And due to the very fast recruitment from the provider, we had over 400 participants within 6 weeks. So the submission deadline for the sleep meeting, which Chris had advised us as possibly the best avenue for that, was in December 2013. So within 6 weeks, we felt we had a decent enough sample size to put a compelling story together. The experience for me and the value for working with faculty, Chris and a colleague from primary care, was that he challenged me with certain questions. My initial draft really wasn't up to par, I'll admit, but that was the value of working with people with vast publication experience. So the questions were, was this audience representative of the target? Was our sample representative of the audience that we were trying to educate? Were the insights insightful enough? And we went back and forth and made sure that we pulled out really the most interesting insights that we were seeing from our data. The format that we had used, this was an online simulation, so we had a large volume of data to choose from, so we felt that that had an integrity and provided a robust data set to pull from. But working with Chris in particular, because this meeting is very well known to him, we went back and forth, and he really helped me refine the message, if you will, that was going into the poster. So I found that really valuable help. I think it's a great role for our faculty in CME. This is what they do every day, and I think this is what they can bring their skill set into our world and help us do that better. The last thing I would say, though, we also agreed we wanted to be impactful in presentation, so we made it very eye-catching and stylish in its format. I was really pleased that we got a lot of very positive feedback from the attendees at the meeting. People did stop by, did catch their eye, and we did get into a discussion about the CME program that was behind this. And we were also able to share with them the information on the program that was still available online if they wanted to participate as well. So Chris, I wonder if you had anything else to add from my summary of that experience together.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, it was a unique experience because, while we publish a number of abstracts every year, probably for the past 20 years at that meeting, and I know, very, very large numbers of folks there who go to that meeting, attend that meeting. I think what we did was very unique, and I think that was, great for me because I got to do something that's certainly different, and I thought was very informative and very educational for the folks that are there, because sleep medicine is really trying to attract more interest from primary care and docs that actually treat insomnia and some of the other more common sleep disorders. And at this particular meeting, we were able to engage other sleep specialists in this sort of engage them in this sort of cause and sort of show them a little bit about what we've done and what more needs to be done in primary care. And I think people appreciated the uniqueness of that from sort of the typical posters or the typical abstracts that are there. And I think I was able to engage Karen with a lot of folks there at the meeting who were interested in what we were doing. And I agree, having a faculty member there who's a member of that society, who's not necessarily an officer of the society, but someone who's going to help you be able to interact with faculty in a more in a more sort of rigorous scientific way, but still have the advantage of your experiences as CME providers to go along with that, is something that's really not present in my experience at most of these meetings. So it was a great experience for me.
I think we lost Karen, Derek.
I think we did lose Karen. I have to say that she's in Philadelphia like us, and we are having horrendous weather right now with a thunderstorm outside, and she was having a little bit of connection issues anyway. So we could maybe give it a minute or two and see if she's able to pop back on again.
There she is.
And we'll see if she can...
Hi.
Hey, you're back!
I got thrown out. I heard a big noise outside, and so I don't know what's going on outside my window right now. I'm afraid to look.
Well, I'm just telling everyone that we're having horrendous weather here, so I blamed it on that.
Yeah. So I have a question for everyone as I'm kind of listening to this now. Is there we talk about a publication bias in a lot of clinical trials that are out there, and how there is the literature is replete with references to how there is many more positive data trials than negative data trials. Is that somewhat of a concern for us in CME, that if we have a publication plan but the data doesn't look like we think it should look like, the participation doesn't look like we think it should look like, the publication plan gets scrapped and we simply only are publishing outcomes from successful initiatives? And
I think that probably happens to some extent, but when you're in that sort of situation, I think it's just really important. There's got to be some kind of key learning that happened, regardless of what the outcome was. You've demonstrated a persistent learning need, or there's always some way, I think, that you can try to spin it to pull out those nuggets that you learned along the way. Some journals won't let that fly. If your participation is low, to what Chris was saying before, if your sample size is small, that might get you out of the running. But again, that would just maybe bring some of those other publication types into play. It doesn't always have to be a journal. I think you can be really creative in finding different avenues to put your data.
But I mean, in my mind, you're right. There's always going to be that risk, just like there's a risk for that in the medical literature, not simply clinical trials, but in the entire scientific literature, particularly the medical literature. That's a real issue, and I think there's a couple ways we sort of address that, and you could think about that in terms of CME too. And one is replication. I mean, if you have a critical finding that you think is important, that's something that's going to move the field, the literature forward, and sort of our understanding about CME, I think that could happen as well. You want to replicate that, and you'd want other CME providers, other independent providers to do that. Now, it's going to be a little bit more tricky with regard to CME, because in most cases, the funding for CME comes from an industry that has a vested interest in that particular, sometimes that outcome, and so I think there will be a need for critical evaluations of that literature, whether that's editorial commentation, comments from sort of unbiased CME sites or scientists or even providers, I think that's going to be a critical element, something to balance that potential bias. That's certainly going to be, an issue.
Now, one of the things that was in the ISET survey yesterday, that came out a couple days ago, was whether supporters should pay for outcomes or for publication of outcomes. It seems like there's been a little bit of a shift in that they're a little bit more willing now to publish than perhaps they were before. Do you guys build that into your budgets? Have you had any pushback, from supporters about that? Kind of what has been in your experience on that end of things?
We've had a really good experience with the supporter community in terms of them being supportive of our publication plans. I can't think of any recent examples where the manuscript got scrapped because the supporter didn't want it, or a grant got denied because the supporter didn't want the manuscript. So we've seen a lot of support because I think they're trying to demonstrate their worth as well in terms of fighting for budgets and being able to show that CME really matters and it makes a difference and it's worthwhile. And I think publication helps the supporter community as much as it helps the provider community.
Okay, I didn't mean to hijack your session, Karen, so go ahead.
No, that's fine. I'm sure you were. I wasn't sure if I was in or out myself with whatever's going on outside my window. But just conscious of the time, there was a couple of things we wanted to talk about in terms of skill sets and resources required. We covered off the kind of the poster being maybe an entree opportunity for people, but when we're really talking about developing peer-reviewed manuscripts, should we encourage providers just to try publishing data if they haven't done already, or what advice would you share, Allison, first of all, coming to you, on the skills and resources that you should evaluate in your own organization?
Sorry, this is better now, right? I think if you have either writers in-house or you have access to writers with the skills that are necessary to help frame the message in a format that is kind of expected in a publication, I think that you could try that out. But really, it's the skills on that front end of being sure that you know that you'll be able to write a concise manuscript is important. I think academic training goes a long way, because we publish along the way, to graduate school, medical school, and so that's a skill set that gets kind of is nurtured with us in our graduate training. And if you don't have a person like that on staff, I think you can find somebody with publication experience.
Great.
Yeah, I think faculty, typically faculty will be interested in assisting with that process as long as, there's a clear sense and they're convinced that this will, or has the potential anyway, to lead to a well-designed, well-written publication with extremely reliable data. That's where you're going to be able to engage faculty in that process and utilize those skill sets that Allison was referring to, if they're not available in-house. But even if they're not available in-house, I think back to the idea that we want a stepwise. You may want to utilize a stepwise approach. So while you may not have the skill set to develop a full publication in a high-end journal, you certainly, I think, could attempt, with a very low level of skills, still to be able to be able to develop an abstract that could be very informative and provide a lot of the sort of benefits we talked about earlier at a scientific meeting. So, understanding that there are different levels of publication and levels of skills required to be successful at each of those levels.
And collaboration seems to be a theme that's coming up more and more in the CME world generally. And Jan Perez mentioned this morning in her session, sort of advocating collaborating when it really has value. And I think this is one of the areas that maybe you could think about, tapping into. There may be more writing experiences within an academic provider relationship, or if it's just a simple reaching out to somebody like Scott and other experienced writers to bring that skill set in-house if it's a different style of writing for your team. So Alison, on that, I know you had an example of a manuscript that MedIQ published that you would like to share with us. Derek, I've got the citation on a slide, and I have some questions for Alison. So maybe you could start with sharing a little bit of the background to this particular CME activity and why you guys at MedIQ felt it was worthy of a publication effort behind it.
Sure. I'm sad that this is not as pretty a visual as your nice poster, although the journal thing there is really nice. But this was an activity that we collaborated with Humana, and we did a claims study looking at care practices before physicians participated in a CME activity on atrial fibrillation, and then afterwards. And so we were trying to correlate improvements in evidence-based care reflected through the claims data to participation in the CME activity. So this was a large, long study that was very rigorously designed on the front end. We engaged faculty for this webcast that we made available to anybody who was interested. But then the partnership with Humana was able to zero in on physicians in the Humana network and get claims data from their patients with AFib. And so we looked at evaluating stroke risk. We looked at, rate and rhythm control use, things like that. So once the activity had its run and its year was up, Humana did the data pulling for us. And it took a while. After the activity had to be live for a year, and then we had to wait, I believe we waited 6 months afterwards to collect all the data, and then the data analysis started. So I think that this activity, we taped it in 2009. You can see our publication was 2012, so this is a very long process. But basically, what we were able to do with this is that, we in this manuscript, we described our methodology. We provided our results, and we had some really nice results showing decreases in healthcare costs and utilization with the physicians who participated in our activity. And we were able to draw conclusions from that, and we provided our limitations, potential confounders of our data, all the things that you see in typical publications. And we had Joe Alpert and Jerry Nacarelli, two prominent physicians, cardiologists in the AFib space, work with us on this publication. So we were really proud of it.
Yeah, you should be. In fact, I know you said it was a program from 2009 published in 2012, and that is one of the challenges. The timeline to publication is one of the challenges that I think we face in trying to stay current. But this particular initiative, if I may say so, seems very current with the kinds of things we're talking about in the CME space now, and trying to get to that level of data that you were able to achieve with your colleagues at Humana, I think, and then choosing the journal that was a managed care journal really situated the data on costs to the right audience. So I think that's an important thing as part of our planning as well, is with all the things that you could talk about your program, is where's the key message that's coming out and where best to target that. So did you also consider bringing that to more general medical space as well? In
terms of the results, or?
Yeah, and publishing elsewhere.
This was the only submission that we prepared, and we thought that it just it fit in nicely just with the managed care aspect of it. We have found ourselves in that position where we pick a journal, it looks great, but then we don't get accepted. So then we're left to reassess our options, and we've done that sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. So we're very practiced at that. But it's true, we really do try to think about the audience and who is going to be interested in this type of information when we're trying to match up the journal. And then other practical things like how many times a year does the journal publish, and what are its requirements in terms of, what's the length and things like that. So a lot of those considerations go into the decision.
Great. Guys, do we have any more questions for external?
Yes, actually we do, if you are ready for one.
Uh-huh.
From the audience. So, what are some key differences in terms of publishing data for a CE/CME type journal versus a peer-reviewed scientific journal targeted specifically to HCPs? Any tips for determining if the data are scientific journal worthy?
Allison, would you like to take that?
I think that maybe just to tackle the first part of that question first, what we have found is that we will take more design-like publications to like the industry journals, where we're talking about educational design or other more nuts and bolts things like that, and we take the ones that have actual outcomes. We try to take those to the clinical journals. Trying to decide whether your data are publishable, I think there's got to be a good statistical analysis on it, and the statistics really help you tell your story and support your conclusion. So I think if you've got a good analysis on it, you've got a good sample size, back to what Chris was saying earlier, that generalizability of your results is really important. I think those might be 3 good criteria for deciding whether a clinical journal might accept a paper like that.
Mm-hmm. And if I could kind of advocate, I think encouraging providers to step outside of our CME community and our educational community more and more, and really consider that differentiation. I think you made a very clear distinction there. We're talking about educational methodology, perhaps. Our education community should be the primary target, but if it's really something that shows how to increase performance and enhance patient care, really it's the clinicians, the practicing clinicians, that should see that, I think. So I think that's a very clear and easy distinction to make. So Allison, from a provider's perspective, how would you leverage your publication stream? As I mentioned before, you guys have been very successful. How do you use this to further MedIQ as a provider of excellence?
I think it helps demonstrate that we approach outcomes very seriously, and we're very rigorous in that process. And so I think that just, it helps us partner with the supporter community in demonstrating the worth of CME, that it really can produce good results that show its effectiveness.
Great. And Chris, is there any advantage to faculty? I mean, I guess someone with your career, you don't need the opportunity to be an author on yet another publication, but what does it mean to you to see this kind of publication stream coming from a provider?
Well, I think you're right. You don't need necessarily. Sometimes you don't need a publication, but I think that's the point. You want to make your you want to design your CME so that it is attractive to a faculty member for being involved with that publication, and as long as there's something unique and informative about it, I think the faculty members will be on board. It's also going to be a good thing for a faculty member to have an interaction with a CME company that has a good publication track record. So I think there's a lot of advantages to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think it raises the credibility of the field generally, and I think one of the The knock-on effects could be that it raises the standards of our educational design, because we're going to have to reach rigorous design standards to pass the peer review process for publication as well. If I could put my own supporter's hat on, I think how I would have leveraged publications in my time internally is that it is sharing. When you have something that's published and peer-reviewed, it opens up the doors in how widely you can share that information internally. Often medical education teams are siloed and a little firewalled off from colleagues in the commercial space, so they may not have the opportunities to present widely. They may not have the opportunities to share outcomes reports as much as we would like to, but if something's published and therefore deemed to have, passed some sort of evaluation to be published, then it makes it easier to share it on a wider basis. It also means we could put that kind of data in future RFPs, because again, one of the advantages of sitting on the supporter side is that you see all this great work that people do and you get all of this information in, but you're not really at liberty to share that. It's not your information, it's the provider's data. But if you've supported something and it's turned out to be really good, you want to look for more things that look like that. So it increases the opportunity to share it externally as well. And I think it's just a nice validation that you've made the right decisions in choosing to where to apply your limited educational support. So I think there's a lot we can do as a community to leverage publications. So I have a sort of a summary of practical tips to close on, but wanted to check in with Derek and Scott first if we had anything pressing externally we needed to address.
Nope, we're good. Just probably time to wrap it up and bring it to a close.
Great. Any final last thoughts from Allison you'd like to share?
No, I think, I think this has been a really great discussion, and I hope that we're going to start to increase that less than 1% of CME published activities getting published, just because the benefits really are far-reaching for us, for the supporters, for faculty. So I would like to see that increase.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be a snowball effect. If you start to see more of those, it'll enhance and help sort of produce more of the publications from the CME side as we go forward.
Great. So, Chris, all the CME providers you work with now are going to be wondering, why is he asking, are we going to publish this?
Right.
You make that as a criteria for your involvement.
I'm not doing any more CMEs unless they're going to get published.
Thank you for joining the CME community. It's always great to get somewhat of an outsider's perspective. So just a quick recap. We wanted to give you some practical tips and tools to take away. I can't emphasize enough the ICJME publication. Please look at that. It's very detailed and walks you through everything you need to know about publishing in the medical journal space. Think about planning at the outset, your skills, your resources. Use your faculty for everything they can bring, their experience in publications, their advice on which outlets to look at. Look at your timeline. I think we do need to be a little bit more nimble as possible and not have a 3-year time frame between CME activity and its publication. If possible, maybe we can chop things up, have a series of posters for a longer term initiative, or if we're really starting to see things from an interim sample, use that. If you're looking for industry support, put it in your grant request up front, but I would suggest to providers, maybe this is a little controversial, think about self-funding. If you can't get the external funding to do so, I think it will raise the standards, the perception of you as a provider. Know the compliance requirements around publications and exercise caution. If you haven't done this before, think about jumping in. Maybe, as you said, maybe a magazine article or a poster is the safest place to start. If you're going to do this, do it well and help your colleagues in the CME community leverage the value of publications. Make it easy for supporters to share it and for providers to demonstrate the value of all the hard work that goes in. So thank you very much to everybody for their attention. I apologize for the wobbly technology halfway through. Thank you for bearing with us, and thank you, Derek and Scott, for a great day overall.
Thanks, Karen. Really, on our end, the technology wasn't that bad. You're in and out, so I think it was worse for you than it was here. So let me just do a few housekeeping things. And this was a great session, by the way. And if you're watching this on the archive, I would encourage you to also take a look at the What Do Supporters Do with Outcomes Data session that was at 1 o'clock. I think these two sessions kind of dovetailed nicely together.
Yes.
So to finish up, please, if you have not already done so, do the survey. It's right on the same page you're watching this video on. It's 5 questions. There's a little link there. We have, at last count, I think there's been 100 people who have taken the survey so far, Scott.
Probably a little more than that now.
Even a little more, so which is really great and sort of blows me away a little bit. But please do so we can get a better sense of who all has been participating. Oh, I don't need to do this next one because there's no more sessions. This is the last one. So again, thank you all for participating in CME Palooza. I think it went really great. We had double the amount of participants on average this time around than we did back in the spring. So I can't be more pleased with how everything went. Scott, do you have any final words you want to give?
If people want to send us feedback, there's a place on the survey to send feedback, suggestions for the future. That this is still our first year of this, so we're always open to feedback and thoughts from the CME community on how we can make this a better educational resource in future years.
Absolutely. So I guess on behalf of everyone, thank you, and have a great day and a great weekend.
Great.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
And we're out.
And bring your umbrellas. Although it looks like it's slowed down a little bit.